Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, listeners, another episode, and we've got a great one today. Got a colleague, an old friend, and somebody who's very, very used to giving his opinion within the industry, Darryl Judd, part of the Logistics Executive Group, and he's actually the Managing Director, Corporate Advisory, which also covers mergers and acquisitions. So, Darryl, lovely to have you on board. Thank you very much for appearing.
Chris, absolute pleasure to be here, and wonderful to join everybody else that's enjoying our time in lockdown at present. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and it's nice to see that you're nice and casual. Some people have said to me, "What am I doing wearing T-shirts and things?" And I just received a lovely clip from Salin about the how to do the Zoom quick dress. So somebody has come up with cutting the back out of a suit and a shirt and a tie, so you can put it on very quickly over your T-shirt just when the phone rings. So very, very.
It's any conversation, I can assure you, I'm dressed from the waist down. But look, I think it's really interesting. This whole the move towards Zoom, and I think it's going to have, like any long-term crisis that we face in history, one of the things we do know is it leads to lasting changes, and I think we'll see more of these types of things emerge from it.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think most people, well, like me, whenever anybody said Zoom to me, it reminded me of a song that actually came out in 1983. So if anybody listening can send us in who sang it, then there'll be a little competition there. But most people now, Zoom is it's everybody uses it, so it's incredible. So that's one good thing that's come from this. But Darryl, one of the things I want to talk to you about now, and with your vast experience, new normal. Okay, so everybody knows, anybody on this planet now knows that things aren't going to go back to all our yesterdays. So there's going to be a new normal. Now, what they're all concerned about, whether it's from the farmer, retailer, entertainer, sports person, what is that new normal going to look like? Now, I've got a few ideas myself, and I'm sure you've got some. So hopefully now over the course of the next 35, 40 minutes, we'll exchange a few and see how similar we are. But for you, what do you think the new normal is gonna bring, and what do we have to think about now as we're entering into everybody's exit strategy?
Yeah, look, it's a very interesting topic you pose, Chris, and I think there'll be a lot of experts in various boardrooms around the world studying that and thinking about the connotations of what does the new norm look like once we come out of COVID-19. I think, importantly, I think COVID-19 event, if anything, has taught us that actually we're probably going to encounter more of these types of events. And I think the example I want to use, if I can, is if you look back in modern history in supply chain and logistics and manufacturing and just globally, nowhere have we ever had an event that has affected demand, supply, and our workforce availability all at the same time globally.
Yeah, that's
the big shift. And so when we think about what we're likely to see, let's think about what the past looked like. And we were moving towards digitization. AI was becoming increasingly more important. Working from home, maybe if you're a freelancer, maybe if you had a flexi job. But I think the big trends that come out of here now is cardless payment systems, move away from cash. I think that will accelerate. The remote working will certainly reshift and rechange a lot of organizations and employee structures. That has a cascading effect to digitization, to the way that we use data to preempt our supply chains. And I think generally speaking, we're going to see a return to nearshoring. So I think there's lots of themes that will occur. It's just how fast they will occur as organizations start to evaluate what's right for them and what's right for their consumers.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And like at this point, obviously, before we get into too much detail, I think one of the things that we try and do, both Salem and myself, is whenever we're talking to somebody, to bring back down to a very, very common and unfortunate denominator, the amount of people that are losing their lives as a result of this. And everybody is touched. Everybody's equally touched by the frontline workers, the carers, the nurses, doctors, people who support hospitals and care homes. And now people are starting to realise, people who work in supermarkets, transport, people who work in our industry, you know, making sure that the supply chains are moving. Those people now are getting a lot more recognition and profile, and they should have done for a long time. So there seems to be a little bit of a shift back to the important things in life, and I think that's a good thing, and I think that should definitely stay, and hopefully it will remain.
Yeah, look, I agree. You know, we've seen countless examples across the entire globe of the small things that make enormous differences. I know in your home country we saw you know, Captain Tom, and the fact that had not just in his community but the wider global community, the way they embrace that. And I think we can talk about that, you know, all day long. And I think that's been, if there's a positive to come out of this, it's allowed us to reconnect with the human element that we sometimes forget when we're in our busy worlds, or we're chasing the corporate dollar, or we're going through our own regional crises. You know, COVID-19 was one of those events that I think, you know, instilled fear into all of us, because, you know, the next question is, well, what, you know, when is it going to hit me? What's next for me? And I think, although we have, you know, as greater tragedies, things like cancer and influenza and others, COVID-19, you know, it didn't discriminate on in race and color and age and geographics. Doesn't matter who you were. And I think that really resonated with people. And so human nature is that we are caring. And I think, you know, as we go into our communities, people were much more conscious of that. And I also think, Chris, and maybe this is a little bit topical or a little bit controversial, but I think in some parts our governments were slow to catch on to that.
Yeah, 100%.
Healthcare workers, our first responders, had to step up. And most people that I've spoken to that are in those types of professions do so because they have a caring nature. And so, you know, that caring nature shines through in times like this. And we've seen wonderful examples, you know, from young to old, to girls to boys. It doesn't really matter. Yeah,
no, it's incredible. And like you said there about governments, and it's no criticism, because the politicians are in untested times as well. So they're doing as good as they can. But the thing that definitely concerns me, or something I surprise every time I look at the news, is how many different experts have got so many different opinions. And, you know, why can't we just do what's best collectively and work closer together and do something that makes sense? And when you think about, you know, just having stocks of PPE and just looking at the sustainability of certain things, God forbid they did go wrong, I think it also indicates and shows how little attention, not just governments and politicians, but any company of any size, how little attention they actually placed on resilience, sustainability, and basic risk.
Yeah, and look, yeah, your point's very valid. I think if you look back, I think we will be teaching the COVID-19 case study for a very long time in universities to come. But yeah, I think one of the things we have to remember is, you know, we are in uncharted territory, and one of the impacts that's been, you know, felt has been our globalization of supply chains. You know, as global supply chains became increasingly more interconnected, and emerging markets became much more accountable for a greater slice of GDP, we found that we were centers of pockets of manufacturing, and it became easy for us to rely upon that. And, you know, we quickly forget the Icelandic volcano a few years back, the tsunamis in Japan, and of course in 0508 and 0506 in Asia, that the disruption that one or two events has on our global supply chain. And as we think about risk, we now have to think about something else, and that is the fact that it may not be a regional event that affects our supply chains. So for governments and for those who are involved in things like PPE, we now need to reshape what that looks like to sustain a domestic economy approach, rather than relying on the fact that we can source from somewhere else. Yep. This event showed us that actually if the rest of the world requires it as well, we are going to be in a lolly scramble, and that's not something we can allow to occur again.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And also looking at the way things have been handled, or you know, could have been handled better, it makes you think, why on earth now were people not focusing on certain things? Because previous crisis, it's always something pretty short. It's either an explosion, an earthquake, a tsunami, a little outbreak of violence, whatever it is, and people know that it's going to end, and then they've got to recover and repair. But this doesn't seem to have that end, and the longer it goes on, like you said, it's affected everything. Nothing has affected the world like this. And when you think of the discussions and the arguments and the debates about budgets and who's got what money and taxes and everything, and then all of a sudden that's just been swept to one side, and no amount of investment in weaponry or subs or battleships or whatever, nothing has had such an effect.
No, look, you're right, and I think it comes back to a point I made earlier. You know, where in history have we seen demand, supply, workforce availability all converge globally at the same time across many jurisdictions? And I think, you know, that event in itself makes this a very unprecedented event. I think what we will see in future is much more planning, more sophisticated contingency plans around things like being able to turn on PPE manufacturing faster in a domestic environment. You know, there's some great examples coming out of sectors that have reinvented themselves.
Yeah.
You've got one in the UK with the racing teams produce ventilators, and I think it was, I may be wrong when I say this, but I think it was Mercedes-Benz were able to reproduce one in 10 days. Now, it wasn't just the power of Mercedes-Benz bringing into it. There was an ecosystem that allowed Mercedes-Benz to take the current patents that were held by other companies, to dissolve them into their manufacturing system, to retool themselves. It required the human skill to come into it. And so that collaboration enabled a recovery, which was something that we probably wouldn't have seen previously had it been a more regional type crisis.
Yeah, no, 100%. Now, earlier you spoke about working from home.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, so many people have had to, and so many people are getting used to it. Yeah, all of us. And apart from looking at people's decoration and getting ideas of what you can do when you get back, it's opened up an awful lot of opportunity, because for people to do it, it saves commute time. That in itself saves pollution. It brings you closer to your families. It gives you maybe, who knows, maybe anything between 5 and 10 extra hours a week to either do something that you want or to be with your family. It's so much more flexible. And now there's systems where you can actually monitor the productivity of somebody working from home. Mm-hmm. So I think that's hugely positive now moving forward. And it'll also reduce the amount of cost to companies for office space.
Yeah, look, I think remote working is always a challenge, and for employers, there's always been that element of just how productive are my staff? How effective are they when I'm not in the office or not around? How do we communicate? This forced event meant that actually we had to adopt, firstly, trust. Second of all, technology to enable us to do what we're doing here today, communicate. And we had to learn to adapt our systems to accommodate the ability for our people to work at home. And through that experience, it wasn't 1 or 2 days. It's been, for us, we're 6 weeks into it, 6 or 7 weeks into it here in Dubai. And it's that lasting effect that actually organizations will be now looking and saying, well, maybe just maybe we can migrate some of our workforce to that. Now, there'll be some industries where that is difficult. Manufacturing, for example, machines will still need an operator, they'll still need maintenance, and et cetera, et cetera. However, for a big part of our workforce, that flexibility element and productivity element will now continue into a remote environment. And you think about the spur off that has, Chris, digitization. We're using today that probably weren't even in our sphere of interest 6 weeks ago, but we're finding them now to be very effective. We're finding now how to protect ourselves, to access our databases, to communicate to our customers, to have a new style of relationship. And certainly I'm in no doubt whatsoever that will have a lasting effect. And if you cascade that further, things like, do we need the big offices? Can companies reduce their overheads by having smaller offices, more hot desks? And in certain cultural environments where maybe we have a more hierarchical management culture, we're seeing that crumble away now. And that's been driven through necessity.
Yeah. And I think one of the things you said there about offices, I think we're going to go through two stages. One, obviously, is the fear factor and the flexibility and also the enforcement of certain activities and actions until a vaccine or until some sort of medication is there so that people feel that it's completely gone. So I think you're going to get an awful lot of encouragement with technology and with working from home, because of the fact that you're going to have to keep certain social distancing in the office space, which then takes up your capacity, etc. But then afterwards, I think then you're 100% right. There'll be a balance and there'll be a reduction in the amount of space that's necessary for people.
Yeah, I think we'll see more of that shared economy evolve, and I know that's been a topic for a number of years now. The ride sharing businesses, the office sharing businesses.
Yeah.
I think those sort of elements will really accelerate now, and I think that we'll see a lot of investment go into that, and possibly a lot of repurposing of existing infrastructure to enable that to occur more quickly.
Yeah, no, 100%. Now, another thing, whenever and you mentioned about the creativity, and we've heard of even Dysons, they're putting their hand to ventilators, etc. All manner of incredible flexibility, speed, innovation, and dynamism from people who've got those capabilities, which is incredible. And also, normal, or what I would call normal industries and normal businesses converting. So your restaurants to home deliveries and, being so creative. But I think an awful lot of that is going to change as well in the future.
Yeah, I agree totally. I think you're going to see much more. Let's take the home delivery market for a start. I mean, home delivery has always been a rapid growth industry, as we know, but in certain parts of the world, the barriers with cash on delivery, with digital systems, with consumer confidence, I'll just pop to the shop because I know that I can get it there and it's easier, and I might have to wait a day for my delivery and it may not even come, and all those sort of barriers. This experience taught us that we can have some confidence in those networks. It moved the retailers that didn't have a digital presence or were slow to have a digital presence. It moved them rapidly into that space through necessity of having their bricks and mortar revenue turned off. Likewise with manufacturers that hadn't thought about direct to market, B2C rather than B2B. They've had to jump that barrier in the last 2 months and adopt a different business model. And slowly but surely, that'll be a lasting effect, because the confidence that that might be a risk for us has actually disseminated. So I think that's one. In Dubai, we saw so much demand for home delivery that the courier companies couldn't provide enough capacity. So taxis were repurposed because no one was using taxis. So that shared asset, that shared infrastructure now becomes something that's much more flexible to enable us to adopt to that environment and to drive our consumer wants.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, isn't it? And e-commerce, I mean, my goodness me, if ever there was a boost for a part of the business sector, they've certainly gained it. It's incredible. And the amount of people, especially people that are vulnerable, people that are older, that would never normally have dealt with it, they're having to deal with it. Their families are teaching them how to do it, and now they're getting confidence in doing it. Some of the people I know and some of our own family members, I mean, they are flying away. They're getting deliveries on a regular basis. It's incredible.
It's probably one of the success stories to come out of this is that, the areas where retailers were slow to adopt that omni-channel distribution arrangement, they had no choice. And at the same time, as you described, consumers that didn't have the comfort level with technology, they've now got that level of comfort that, oh gee, it does work and it does turn up. And I think that will be something that'll be a lasting effect in the supply chain. Another good example is the amount of airlines that have turned to running passenger aircraft as cargo aircraft.
Yeah, freighters.
25 years ago, we used to do exactly that. We used to run our passenger 767s as freighters in the evening, moving the newspapers around and the mail around. But slowly over time, we thought, gee, we need a freighter aircraft to do that. It's more appropriate. Of course, the passenger airlines wanted time to do their overnight maintenance and scheduled maintenance. But now airlines have had to reshape themselves in order to satisfy that demand. And so we've learned a lot through this in a very short period of time, and those lessons will be taken back into our businesses as we start to think about, well, how do we set up ourselves for sustainability and for growth and for better performance in the coming years?
Yeah, no, exactly. And it is about, I was just saying that, the term freighters now that people are saying, which is a converted passenger freighter. So that's also quite creative as well. But now, in one of the areas that you specialise in, with regards to what would I say, transformation, change, upgrading of business outlooks, etc., and capability, airports. Now, I think airports are going to also take on a much more prominent role in exactly what can, must, and shall happen within their sphere of responsibility. So not so much the carriers as it was in the older times, but it's now going to be airports, and there's going to be so much responsibility, duty of care, regulatory compliance that they're going to have to take on board. Now, from your previous history and experience, how do you think that's going to materialise?
Yeah, look, I just touched on a very, very interesting point, and the question is, are airports going to be one of our frontline screening tools we use for our people who are leaving the country or entering the country in terms of healthcare screening and biometrics? Airports have always been very focused on the customer experience, increasing. Yet they're busy places. We're constantly using our elbows to shuffle around. A lot of people in busy places like Dubai, where we move upwards of 250,000 passengers a day through our terminals. And so they're busy places. And where you have that congestion and you have a pandemic like that, of course, you therefore have an element of risk. It's interesting to see what's been adopted at DXB with the blood testing, the blood screening. We're doing blood tests on all outbound passengers. And I think, the innovator in me looks forward and thinks, gee, at some point in time, how does that experience get digitized, much like we are with our biometric security? There's a lot of talk in the media about immunization passports, whether that will be embedded into our electronic passports we have today, whether our first class passengers, our premium passengers still want to be in the hustle and bustle of a terminal, moving their way through crowds, or will that reshift? Maybe we'll see the emergence of the private jet market boom for that as those first class passengers seek a more intimate experience. But I think definitely airports will become a duty of care environment. I see governments using that channel as a means in which to screen increasingly, not just for security, but perhaps for healthcare and other factors as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And now you mentioned there something about the customer experience. So that move from customer experience, which was all around retail, which is around timings and which carriers come in and everything else. And now they're actually, in my opinion, they're moving to owners or gatekeepers of hygiene and care, and that's going to be one of the most important things for the gateway in and out of the country, as with ports. But for airports now, I think they're going to have to take on a much more influential and regulatory perspective.
Yeah, I think data, right? We're talking about capturing of big data that can be analysed and used to mitigate risk. In this case, we're talking about healthcare data. Previously, airports were always a means of capturing our security data. Who was entering, who was exiting, and controlling that element. But let's get them through as quickly as possible. Let's make that as digital experience as possible, our smart gates, etc. Here in Dubai, we're using a lot of biometric screening now, where you can just simply walk through to the gate. But let's get them into the shopping environment as quick as possible and maximize our revenue. I think now what we'll see is much more different controls as we go through there. I think we'll see a separation of the passengers. The days of waiting, the trolleys all behind one another. We'll see a change in the way that we will process our kiosks at the kiosk level. I think we'll see much more automation and smart gate technology so that we separate our passengers. And I think we'll use that time in order to use smart technologies to capture healthcare data and to do pre-screening before we get onto the aircraft.
Yeah, and I think also people are going to get used to now, and the capability is there with artificial intelligence and certain screening systems to actually look at the volume of people which is deemed to be safe in the area. So I think the retail outlets will have limited people allowed to go in. There'll be certain restrictions. There'll be different types of announcements. So it's not going to be so much of the, you know, if you see a bag unattended, but it's going to be there are too many people, you need to move, etc. And I think it'll also change the process hugely with regards to check-in.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there'll be much more of a push towards ourselves checking online prior to getting to the airport. Yeah. I think we'll see a lot more electronic interface there rather than human contact. And I think we'll be using that time at the airport for more screening and more control of our passenger movement. You know, already today, you know, we've had the unwinding of some of the lockdown restrictions here in Dubai, which have been some of the toughest in the world. But you know, one of the interesting things is that whilst the shopping malls will gradually reopen, we are going to be limiting the occupancy to 30% of what it was previously. And so, you know, traffic in and out of that store will be regulated. Traffic in the store will be better controlled, so there's not the opportunity for human contact in those interactions. And I think we'll see that reflected in the airport journey as well. I think we'll be, you know, less of the human contact and more digitization.
Yeah, a question, and obviously neither of us are experts on it, but just to have an opinion and a thought. Now, and you just said how tough your lockdown was in the UAE, okay, yes. Which is, you know, and fair play to you. I mean, it was incredible. But yeah. Now that it's starting to be released, and other countries are also releasing, people are going to be looking to see how effective the actual lockdowns were, the capability of tracking the virus and also containing it. Now, not wanting to influence your opinion, but my personal view is that there'll be a lot more thought process going into O&D relationships with regards to international travel when it comes on after the domestic travel. So for a hub like Dubai, it's going to be so important, but the actual acceptance of people's capabilities in some of those origins and destinations is going to be crucial towards point-to-point travel instead of the hub and the connection travel.
Yeah, look, it's a point, and you know, come back and touch it. I think, you know, Dubai and the UAE have done an outstanding job with the way they've handled the crises, and I think we can look at my own country of New Zealand and other countries.
Fantastic.
Yeah, moved very quickly with lockdown processes, and although at first we all probably thought, gee, that's a bit tough. Those actions did enable us to use this term flatten the curve. And flatten the curve is all about giving the healthcare system space to catch up and to make sure we're not overloading that. Whilst other measures like the remote hospitals or the field hospitals, like the remote testing stations were put in place to enable mass testing. And the UAE government's done an amazing job at that, and you know, fair play to them. They've set a great example. To your question on, you know, on the hub, yeah, I'm not so sure, Chris. I wonder if we're not going to see the emergence of the hub again. I mean, if we go back to the economics of an airline and we look at the difficulty that some of the airlines find themselves in with having turned off the revenue, and which is a very expensive business to operate when your assets are on the ground, as you know, you burn a lot of cash for it. I just wonder, I think we're going to see a major reshift of the aviation industry. I think we are going to see a consolidation of capacity. Airlines, first of all, will have a softening of demand. There's no doubt about that. It'll take the consumer some time to want to build up that confidence. And the adventure seekers and family travel will be the first, and followed by business as we judge it to be safer again. And that's going to affect where airlines fly to. And therefore, we may not see as many city-paired flights as we have had previously. Now, when you take away those channels to market or those channels to routes, then effectively the hub system becomes the consolidator for those volumes, because simply the city pair doesn't make viability. And so I'm not so sure about that. I'm a bit of jury out on that. I know where you're going with that, and it makes sense. But I still feel that the hub may see a bit of a revival. But then again, the other counter to that is that we're going to have an abundance of second-hand aircraft parked on the ground. We're going to have abundance of pilots and crew available. And do we see the emergence of new airlines driven by entrepreneurs who specialise in the city pairs that have fallen off the radar screen of the big carriers?
Yeah. And I think the city pairing, I think that's like, the the year to the 2 years or whatever until the vaccine and everything is found, and then obviously people will start to look to optimize the capacity that's available. But I also see a big hit on first class travel, and obviously business we know is going to be affected. So some of these regional, private aviation, with regards to the ease and the convenience and the comfort and the security of limiting your exposure during those fear areas, I think that's gonna definitely have an opportunity. And you mentioned how well you did in New Zealand. I mean, look at the amount of people that tried to get into New Zealand before it went into lockdown because they felt that was the safest place on the world to be.
Well, ironically, I was one of those people that was back in New Zealand when that occurred, and I was trying to come the other way. But you are right. I think even being there a few days before the lockdown, I have to tell you, there was no sense that was going to happen. In fact, one of the reasons I was rushing to come back to Dubai was I had a little bit of inside word that we were heading towards a lockdown, and therefore I wanted to get back to my family. But in New Zealand at that time, that was still very much off the radar. So, fair play to the government there. They made the decision very quickly, and fair play to the public who said, well, that sounds about right. Let's close the doors for a few weeks and see what happens. But I think there's some good lessons there on good governance, and I think those messages cascade across lots of other environments as a means to possibly how to tackle these types of events in the future.
Yeah, no, 100%. And talking about how to tackle them in the future, I think the credibility and the respect and the profile within company structures of people that now deal in QHSS&E, and especially on the risk side and the vulnerability assessment side, I think they're going to be new welcome stars to the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've always known that supply chain and logistics sits right up the top of the board level, and that was a trend that happened 10, 12, 15 years ago, as we had a lot of volatility in our supply chain through things like tsunamis and volcanoes. Those roles got elevated. I don't think there's ever going to be a time that the spotlight is not further on to that supply chain, or more so on it now. I mean, I think the one interesting thing about this is it's taught us just how dependent we are on the very small amount of ecosystem that have become relied upon as we've gone to a globalized offshore supply chain. And although nearshoring has been a trend for the last few years, particularly as the east-west traffic became very expensive, we moved a lot of that supply chain back closer. We still had our ecosystem sitting in Asia, and I think one of the big lessons here and things that we'll be looking at is, do I really want to put all my manufacturing and my inventory all in one location now? Is there a more appropriate place for me to have a secondary dual manufacturing? Can I automate? I think the level of the revival of the automated domestic manufacturing, one of the reasons we outsourced and went to a globalized supply chain model was to drive down costs, to take advantage of labor and productivity gains that made our supply chains more effective and cheaper for us. And the argument was always, I can do it cheaper in China, or I can do it somewhere else. What we're going to see now is much more investment in home-based manufacturing, driven by the revival of automation, of robotics, of AI, of digital.
Yeah.
That's going to be something that certainly at a board level is going to be talked about amongst the big manufacturers, the Unilevers, the GlaxoSmithKlines, etc.
I also think, and I hope, that there'll be a certain degree of conscience when people are making certain supply chain decisions as well, because one of the reasons that certain locations can drive the cost down is because of the labour conditions, the labour expectation, some of the poor duty of care elements that are there. And I think just looking at what's happened, things have to change. And I also think that as far as the H in the QHSS&E, now there's going to be a lot more legislation and regulatory criteria with regards to hygiene. When you look at wet markets and all these things that are coming up now, that has to be looked at, and certain standards have to be put into practice.
Yeah, look, the wet markets is an interesting one. It'll be really over to certain countries as to whether they want to tackle those traditional industries. But I think generally, if we come away from that and back to a point you just raised, which is we're very conscious of the human rights and the treatment of our workers from a global supply chain perspective and sustainability within that. That's been a big focus in our supply chains over the last 10 years as we've looked at all sorts of things from carbon footprints to the way our contract workers are treated. And so I think that oversight will continue. But I do think the big shift in the next 3 to 4 years will be actually, where do I want my alternative manufacturing sites? Where am I going to establish additional supply chain capability hubs closer to my markets to enable me to have that contingency that I'm not reliant on one supply ecosystem? We see already one of the challenges with nearshoring is that whilst we nearshored back to the likes of Latin America for access to North America and to other markets, we didn't move our ecosystem of suppliers. And so 70% of our raw material or pre-raw material is still coming from one location. I think that will be the major shift, Chris, and that's going to have a major impact on our skilled workers, on our technology, our visibility tools, our freight carriers, and all of the elements that make up our supply chain. I think that will have a much more immediate impact in the short term, and it creates a great opportunity for places like the UAE, like Oman, in Eastern Europe, where you've got direct access to very large consumer markets right on your back doorstep. And I think there's an opportunity to emerge from this if governments start to embrace an opportunity to build the infrastructure, to make the availability of trained workers, to create a technology environment that makes it easy, good, reliable internet, and digitization. Africa, fantastic base for operation from manufacturing. Egypt, for example. I think these are some of the things that supply chain managers and boards will start to really have to tackle over the next 18 months.
Yeah, no, 100% agree, Darryl. Now, another thing that you and your organisation deal with is obviously the executive search and getting people moving within the industry. I think now more than ever, our industry, and especially on the cargo side, it's hitting a profile that it should have had decades ago, and the importance of it, and to get new minds, young minds, fresh outlook. I think now more than ever, it's a great opportunity to have a career in our industry.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can reflect back on through this crisis, and as we come out of it, we will look back on for a long time, is just how much of that innovation happened through natural evolution of people saying, well, actually, now's the time that I've been kinking around with this idea. Let's give it a go. Zoom's a great example of that.
Yeah.
Second cousin to Skype, but look at the uptake of that now. And I think you're right. I think it's going to mean organizations are going to, through necessity, have to look at change. And when you look at change, you have to look at what's next. What's going to be around the corner for me? What do my consumers look like? Where are my markets sitting? How do I get to that? What are the tools that's going to enable me to connect those? And so that fresh thinking will drive innovation. And through that innovation, young, old, guy, girl, doesn't really matter. That innovation will bubble to the top. And more than ever, organizations will be looking for sustainability in their markets. Profitability, sustainability, new growth.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like you said there, you covered the full spectrum of the age gap. I think what this has done now is, as sad and what a shame it is, for anybody that's lost a loved one or people that are losing their lives because of something that yesterday wouldn't have happened. It's just crazy. It's terrible. And now also the effect on people with other illnesses and other concerns, the way that's slowing up, and that's going to have another effect. But the good thing that will come, or whether I say good, the opportunities that will come out of this particular situation is, like you said, the innovation, the creativity, and whether you're young or old, so whether you go from Captain Tom to young John, who's sitting in the classroom at the moment, their minds and their creativity and imagination and determination, whatever you want to call it, that's going to be the future of the new normal.
Yeah, I think this has given a voice to a lot of people, Chris, right? I think there's a lot of voices out there now that would have otherwise not been heard. I mean, I find the Captain Tom example very good. I mean, for many, many years, every time I travel to the UK, I pick up any daily paper and I see an article about the NHS. It's not always in the most positive light. But now I think the respect for the work that those frontline healthcare workers have been doing and continue to do, they've been doing that for years, by the way. It's what they do, and they do it well. Now we just start to recognize it because this event's given a voice to that. What will follow and what this event has exposed is actually we need to continue to invest in those services. I'm not an expert in the healthcare industry, but I am an expert in logistics. And I know that, one of the things that will come from this is the investment in making sure we have continuity of supply. We have validated suppliers. We have QA systems that work. We have pockets of humanitarian logistics equipment and resources up our sleeves, ready to go.
Yep.
And will now place that as a frontline priority rather than always being on the budget cut end of it. And I think that's the big shift. And as publics, as voting publics, we will be much more conscious of a government that tells us they want to tax us a bit more, but they're going to take that tax and invest it in this area. And I think if anyone said to us now, listen, we're going to get a slightly higher tax, or your tax money is going to be taken away from large public service salaries and put into frontline healthcare, we'd all probably go, that sounds pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
That's the conscious shift that we will all make as a human nation that has now a sense of what that frontline means to us.
Yeah, and not just letting the people be the ones who take the pain, but if there is to be a choice, or more of a calculated choice from the people's opinion, then that's a good thing, provided that it shifts from something else as well. So some of the expenditure, the
stories are real. We've got a face on it now. We've got a name to it.
Yeah.
And that gives us a sense of ownership of that problem, makes us our own, not somebody who might hold a particular position. I think that's a big shift. There's a face, a name, and a story to it, and it's affected all types of people. It hasn't just been one demographic that's been affected by this.
Yeah, no, 100%. Darryl, listen, we're coming to the end now. So one of the things I would like to do is I would like to invite you with a few other people just to elaborate and also to define what the new normal formula would or could actually look like. So if you've got the time, we'll definitely have another session. So I hope you do. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's always good to listen to you. You've got some great ideas. You've got a great track record, and success with everything that you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I appreciate you doing this series. I know that that this is very much focused on the response to COVID and what does the new environment look like post COVID-19. But I think you said it earlier at the very start of the show. Let's not forget the frontline workers. Let's great gratitude out to the work that they're doing. To our fantastic governments all around the world that have shown that sense of responsibility to all of us as citizens. And I think more than ever, I walk away from this experience feeling that we've become one community again and one world. And I think that's if that's a lasting effect, and that's the new norm, then that's got to be a positive.
Yeah, people are becoming people again.
Yeah, it's a nice catchphrase. People being people.
And let's hope that tomorrow is always going to be better than today.
Absolutely. Chris, thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me on the show.
Likewise, my friend. All the best. Cheers now.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.